Welcome to the Victorious Living Podcast. You're about to hear real stories of real people who have discovered the real hope of Jesus Christ. I'm Christy Overton Johnson, the founder and publisher of Victorious Living magazine. Since 2011, I've had the privilege of sharing the most amazing life stories. I never cease to be amazed at the life-transforming power of Jesus Christ. Today in our podcast, you're going to go deeper into these amazing God stories and hear from those who have overcome incredible odds and discover how they found a life of freedom. You can discover it too. I trust that you'll enjoy today's conversation between our host and our special guest. Thank you for listening, and be sure to share the hope you hear and the mission of Victorious Living.
Welcome to the Victorious Living Podcast. I'm your host, Brooke. I'm on the mic here with Simone Bryant. Simone, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very pumped. You guys might recognize Simone from the latest issue of the Victorious Living magazine, where she shared her amazing story. And she starts off her story talking about when she was a little girl, how she had joy and excitement, and the worries of this world hadn't bogged you down yet. And so you had a pure excitement, being in church and being around people who were Christians and just knowing your ideas about God. But as you grew up, things changed and people let you down, and the foster care system let you down. There were so many things in your life that caused disappointment, in which oftentimes when that happens, we think God's disappointed in us because our circumstances make us feel that way. So Simone, without me telling you what your story is, why don't you tell us a little bit of your story and just the heart change that you've had over the years?
Well, so it's interesting. When I was doing the interview for this, for the magazine, I was sitting there with Christy, and it's so interesting. I always have this memory of me in my foster home. I was probably about 5 or 6, maybe. I remember sitting at the window of, I was in my foster home. I remember being in my room, just sitting at the window, just looking out. And even at 5 and 6 years old, I wonder what my life was going to look like or be like. At the time, the reason why I was in that foster home, because, I was separated from my mom, because of the mental illness she was diagnosed with. There were some struggles with taking care of me and my siblings. But anyway, I'm in the foster home, and I'm just like, man, I don't know what my future is gonna look like. I'm not living with my parents like normal kids are, and I'm going through these circumstances, that kids my age, not a lot of them go through, that I knew of, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm like wondering, what is my future gonna look like? It's not looking too bright, like, will I have the same opportunities as other kids? Just these existential thoughts at 6 years
Of
old.
course.
Like, why am I thinking this?
Yes.
And so anyway, I as I grew up, I just knew the Lord had a hand on my life very young. Like, I just somehow just knew.
Felt it. Yeah.
But growing up, I struggled a lot with, low self-esteem, feeling like I belonged somewhere, feeling like I was wanted, by the adults in my life. When I was in foster care, I was there for about 2.5 years until, I had a social worker. She worked very hard to help find some family for my brother and I at the time, because the foster system, they were going to separate us, and so the Lord just used this lady. I don't know where she is now, but if I knew, I would thank her in person.
Yeah.
But the Lord used her to place me with my uncle and my aunt, who they welcomed us, and into their home. And so again, and please let me know if I need to cycle back to something.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great.
But anyway, so we're moving along. I moved from my foster home, And from there, I moved to North Carolina, and I'm living with my uncle and my aunt. I'm about 8 or 9 years old. And so again, I'm still struggling with these thoughts
Yeah.
of feeling wanted, of feeling like I belonged. And, at that age, I didn't know it was the enemy just kind of telling me
That you
these
didn't have any
lies.
worth and that nobody wanted you. So basically,
Mm-hmm.
and we all can fall privy to this. There,
Yeah.
again, things in our life, there's life circumstances. We live in a broken world. And then the enemy comes and he perpetuates those lies. So he's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
here's your circumstance. So here's your value. And your circumstance and
Mm-hmm.
your value are not tied together. God's
Yeah.
view of you and your value are tied together, but your circumstances and your value aren't. And so
So good.
oftentimes we go through these motions, right? Because we're humans and we want to rationalize everything, right? Everything in
Mm-hmm.
our mind is a little bit black and white. So because this is happening, then there must be something wrong with me. Because this is happening, there must be wrong with this X, Y, and Z situation. And that's not, the world's not like that, right? And thank God it's not like that, because grace isn't like that. If grace
Mm-hmm.
treated us the way that we rationalize situations, then we would only get grace if we were doing certain things. But that's the beauty of
Yeah.
grace, right? Is it covers a lot of gray area. And so again, when you're growing up and you already are human, so you have a tendency to view yourself as unworthy and
Mm.
not called, and then something like foster care gets introduced into your life, and jumping from house to house, and the fight or flight response of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is exciting, I have a bed, I have a home, I have a family, and then in 6 months it's going to be taken from me and I'm basically a gypsy. So then you just start to feed this
Mm-hmm.
cycle, right? Which again starts to change the way you behave towards yourself and others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very it's a very normal thing. It's a very human thing, but it's also a very small way to look at God, right? And
Yeah.
so you're going through these different things, and then your brother, then your face, I know in your story in the magazine, and for those that you are watching and listening, have maybe or maybe not read her story, but at one point you were going to be separated from the one brother that you were still connected to out of the 7 of you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like that, oh, now another thing that's familiar to me is being taken. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what? And then again, you insert yourself as the main issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very daunting thing. So fast forward a little bit, you live with your aunt and uncle, you're getting older, you're going to graduate high school, you graduate
Mm-hmm.
high school and you start studying what?
Social work. So yeah, it's so
I love it.
interesting. Yeah. So, and you know what? I have to be honest, actually. So originally my major was, I thought I wanted to go into the medical field. All I knew is I wanted to help kids. Like I wanted to give back. I wanted to help kids. But then I had this come to Jesus moment when I was at Campbell University, and then my major changed to social work. So even before that, I actually changed my major from pre-med to social work.
I
That's a
get
fun
it. I
story.
went in a pre-med and changed my degree too. So it happens. But
Woo!
I was told this before too, that college is finding out what you don't want to do, not what you do want to do. And I've like definitely that clicked with me, because even if you don't go off to college, most of your adult life is going, I don't think I want to do that. I'll
Mm-hmm.
try this. I don't think I want to do that. And then a lot of times, obviously, the Lord and his sovereignty, the provision comes and
Yes.
you end up where you're supposed to be, and it's no skin off our backs. But I'm
Yes.
with you where it's like I wanted to do pre-med and then I changed, and it was like, oh, I'm glad I changed. That's okay. No
Mm-hmm.
regrets. Like it got me to where I needed to be. It got me to the university I needed to be in, and I met the people I was supposed to meet. But ultimately, I am not cut out for a hospital.
Okay, let's just put that out there. But
Yeah, exactly.
anyway,
Anyways.
but yeah, so the Lord just had me really reflect on, how he wanted to use me. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna, major in social work and humanities, and I want to be a therapist, and I want to help kids that were in my situation in foster care, or, those that had issues with mental health. And so, and I get my master's my bachelor's and master's from East Carolina University. So when I was at Campbell, after I changed my major, I transferred to ECU. And then, I go to school, get my degrees. And when I graduated with my master's, I went straight into working, right? No break at all. And I'm in the field. I'm working with these kids and adults, families essentially. And I'm learning about the trauma, their stories, like, the struggles that these families have and the struggle that these kids are going through and just all of that. And so, I used to, do like assessments, and I would just kind of listen to the stories of kids and their families. And I would say, man, a lot of these kids, these teens that I'm working with are a reflection of myself in some ways to a certain degree, with the trauma background and the broken homes and the anxiety that they're facing, the depression, all of that. And I'm just sitting here going, okay, this is really having me to reflect, like, am I
Yeah.
truly healed myself, And they warned us in school, like, when you go into this field
Yes.
of social work, you're gonna need a therapist. That's just the reality of it. A therapist for the therapist, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't pour out if you're not getting poured into.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Mm-mm.
Exactly. So, the Lord I feel like the Lord allowed me to, um, meet some of these kids and families and, just witness a lot of crisis situations with these kids. I used to work in crisis. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, on call. Yeah, on
Yes.
call crisis worker. I feel like it was very tough. When I tell you very tough, very draining, but I feel like the Lord allowed me to witness some of those things because it forced me to open up, and it
Right.
forced me to go, God, okay, there's something's not right within me. Let me seek you out. What is this?
Right.
And so fast forward, I'm working, my second therapy job. And I remember being at my home office, because at the time, COVID was going on. There wasn't a lot of in-person services. There was just kind of a pause in that. So a lot of remote work was going on. So I was working remotely during COVID, and I'm in my office upstairs, and I just have a breakdown. I break down. The work was too much. The
Yep.
stories that I heard about were too much. It was just triggering,
Of course.
you know. And my husband Cam, he hears me upstairs having a mental breakdown. I'm on the floor just crying. I'm like, I can't
Yes.
take this
I get it.
anymore. I just,
Yeah.
you know. And so he said, Simone, no more. He tells me no more. And so, I take a break. Like I
Yeah.
put in my notice, and it's just, the Lord just kind of uprooted me from that field of work
Yep.
in that season.
And
Mhm.
and sometimes that's what you need. And like
Mhm.
I understand too when you are healing and you're excited and you're eager to help others, like that's a very beautiful quality, but it's also
Mhm.
can be like an unhealthy push. And I think
Mhm.
of like when Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And again, I know he's trying to articulate his heart, right? Where he's like,
Mhm.
I'm gentle and lowly, that's my heart
Yeah.
towards you. And it doesn't mean that we don't work as believers or that we use that as some sort of cop out to not do the things that God's called us to do. But in
Mhm.
the same breath, when you think of a yoke, right, being put on two oxens, and they're carrying the load together. And
Yeah.
sometimes like we want to rush ahead or we want to add more and we want to add more. And the Lord's like, no, it's light. I do the heavy lifting. And,
Yeah.
I know also what it feels like to be in a cycle of obviously wanting to be used by the Lord, but
Mhm.
it's also not some big cosmic chess game that like we're making the moves and we got to save the world and the world's on our
Mhm.
shoulders. Like he saved us and he'll continue to save us, and the families that you are burdened for and loved, he will still save them. Like he will still be
Yes.
faithful to them. And
Yes.
so you get to partner with him in that, but it's
Mhm.
not Simone's got this. She's got
Mhm.
this. I told her she's got to do it. My hands
Mhm.
are off now. And that's just not the
Mhm.
way that it works. Thank God. Thank God it doesn't work that way. But I know
Mhm.
that there's been times in my life where I'm like, wow, God, like I'm ready to go full force and I'm ready to go. Put me in, coach, right? And you're just so
Mhm.
excited to help people because you've experienced freedom, which is what we're called to do. Like, and I think it's 2 Corinthians when Paul talks about the comfort that we receive from the Holy Spirit, we comfort others with. So it's a very beautiful
Yes.
thing.
Mhm.
But when you're not being comforted and you're not being healed and you're not continuing to take inventory of what's in here, it can be a very dangerous place to be, right? To
Mhm.
have this like put me in the front lines, God, when you're like literally being deteriorated on the inside. And so I think it's just such a beautiful thing that you were able to take a pause and go, hey, Lord, like my heart isn't giving up on this calling and my heart's not giving up on these people, but my role in this needs to change right now.
Yes.
And you can have both. You can have a heart for others and still take care of yourself.
Yes.
And it's a very, very like, it's a beautiful balance, right? The Mary and Martha balance of like, you know, Martha's like busy, 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 and Mary's at the feet of Jesus. And he's like,
Mhm.
Mary chose well. She really did. She chose
Yeah.
the right, the good thing. And not that what Martha was doing wasn't a horrible thing, but like she was tired.
Mhm.
And a lot of us can get that way, especially when we've been on a high of healing. And sometimes the high of healing, like we just take on a lot in those moments. And then we're
Mhm.
like, I'm about to crash and burn. Like I
Mhm.
will crash and burn. So I think that's such a beautiful thing that you really like, heed wisdom of your husband. And you also like knew in your heart, like, hey, this is a time to take a step back.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that my heart isn't conformed in Christ and doesn't have a burden for this, but it
Right.
can look different. Each season can look different and it can still be just as exciting and just as hopeful. And you get to watch him work. He doesn't stop being who he is because we're tired. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't sleep or slumber like we do. So I absolutely love that. So kind of fast forward, you took a little step back. What is something that you're learning or have learned in your own therapy that could be helpful to others?
Mm. So much, really. Thoughts. It's thought that your thoughts, your thought life.
Mm.
One thing that I've been learning in therapy is to identify those core thoughts and core beliefs that are getting me to behave in a certain way. Um,
Oh, yeah.
for example, one thing the Lord is healing me of is like just being fearful of, what people will think or say and or do. That fear in the past has prevented me from speaking out, speaking up, doing things I feel the Lord has called me to do. And those thoughts, really, which is the enemy just saying, what are people gonna think? Like, um, or, you're not confident enough to do this, or you're not ready to do this. And so therefore I'm going to act as though, okay, maybe I can't do this, or maybe I shouldn't, or maybe, I should really heed to what people think, but that's not the truth. And so in therapy, we really examine like what is the core thought, what's the core belief. So it's usually the thought or the belief is something I'm believing about myself, or something like you said earlier that I'm believing about God.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm blessed to have a therapist that really challenges my thought life and gets me to rewire my thinking, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in
It's a
therapy,
very
that's
freeing
very helpful.
process. Yeah.
Mhm.
To be
Mhm.
for someone to look into your life and have an objective view and go, hey, because this happened in your life, you just like Eve did with the fruit, you bit into a
Mhm.
lie. You bit into a lie. And the biggest lie that was told to Eve in question was doubt. It was, did God really say? And so you go,
yeah,
I don't know. Then you start to question his character. Then you start to question what he says about you, or what he says about himself, or what he has said about sin. And so then you start to play with it. And then you have a choice if you're going to bite into it or not. And all of us, because we're humans, have bit into it, right? There's nobody that has not bit into a lie at some point in their life. And the beauty of redemption is that Christ steps onto that on the pages of history, like as a person, to free us of those lies and to remind us of the truth, because he can't change. He is the truth. And so the truth he'll always be. And so how kind of him to come into the pages of our life and remind us of the truth. And so a lot of times we live in this tension, and it's like we know the truth, but do we know the truth? And the truth really does set us free, right? Who the son sets free is free indeed. And a son is always a son, a daughter is always a daughter. And I love that about who God is. And I also love that about therapy is it goes into, it kind of helps you step into the past to pinpoint the root issue. Because our behaviors, the things we do, whether it's promiscuity, whether it's drugs, whether it's murder, whether it's, divorce, whether it's, greed, whatever our vice or our sin is, those are symptoms of something much deeper. Much deeper. And so it's behavior modification will never last. It just won't. But when you identify yourself as the son or daughter of the Most High, you assume the position. And I absolutely I've had people in my life, I've been very privileged to have people in my life that even in my shortcomings have put me in places or in positions that I don't feel qualified for. And a lot of times we think, oh, in scripture, God puts people where they're unqualified for one purpose only. And obviously it is to show that he can do it through us. But I also think he does it to show us that even though we don't see in ourselves what we are yet, he is calling us up to something he sees. So he's already entrusting us. So think about if we had, I don't know if you have kids yet.
Not yet.
Okay, I don't have kids either. But if I had a child and, I wanted him to assume responsibility, I wouldn't lash out on him and tell him, how come you didn't do this? I would say, hey, you're mom's leader. Like your mom's big helper, right? How many times have we heard that? Your mommy's big helper. Will you help me go do this? And you see a kid light up and go,
yeah,
I'm mommy's big helper. I can do this. I can help mommy with the new baby. I can help mommy with putting the dishes away. I can help mommy, because you assume what your parent has told you you are.
Yeah.
And so I love that that's what the Lord does, right? Is he puts us in these places where we might not feel adequate yet, but he reminds us who we are. And then all of the insecurities start to fade. And it's less about a test sometimes. And I think it's more about him revealing how he views us.
Yeah. And who he is. And if I may add,
Yeah.
one thing the Lord is, he's showing me, one thing the Lord is revealing to me is, like you said, his character and who he is, and who he thinks, or how he thinks about me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And also, that he's a loving father. And again, not everybody has had a physical father present in their
Yeah,
lives.
loving
So
earthly dad.
some may
Right.
go, well, what is that like? My dad was never in my life. So how you gonna tell me God's a loving father? I don't even know what that's like.
Yeah.
And we view an absence of a father. We view God in that lens.
Yep.
Whether
how we view our earthly dads.
Right. Or we may have had an earthly father, and maybe our earthly father wasn't as nurturing, or just not what we needed them to be. So we view God through that lens of our earthly father. But God is showing me, and my dad wasn't in my life.
Right.
So there you go. I had to learn, okay, God, you're a father. What does that look like? And one thing he's showing me as a father is to sit in those places of hurt that I've experienced and let him heal those areas, cuz a lot of times in life with what I've been through, I put too much pressure on myself to heal quickly and
Yes,
to
me
like,
too.
oh,
Yeah,
I should be over this by now. Like, oh man, why am I still hurting with this? But it's like sometimes we have to sit in those moments with the Lord and let him minister to those wounds. The Bible says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. Like I truly feel that's a part of the healing process. Once he
absolutely.
reveals, a deep root in us, um, he allows us to go back to those moments of, man, God, this is specific thing that happened to me was really painful. And then the Lord can go with you in that and heal that area. I think sometimes we skip over that part, and I've
Yes.
done it.
Oh,
Because
same.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's it's not always an easy process. I'm just gonna be real. It's
Yeah.
not
It's
always an
not.
easy
No,
process,
no.
but when you sit with God, some and that may look like crying. It may just be you and the Lord crying it out.
Been there.
Being real, like
Yeah.
King David.
Yeah.
In
Be
the
real.
Psalms, he praises the Lord, but also he laments at the same time. But then he goes back to
Oh
praising
yeah.
God.
Almost every other chapter he'll be like, why have you forsaken me, God? Do you not care? Do
Right?
you not see my troubles? And then the next one's like, you are the God of deliverance. And I always joke because I'm like, the Lord, and this is not to like throw shame or shade on any mental health disorder,
Oh yeah,
but like
yeah,
the
yeah.
Lord knows I can be bipolar with my emotions. I can be on this side of emotions and I can be on this side of emotions all in one day. And
Mm,
thank God that my future is not being held by my emotions,
okay.
because Lord knows there are times where I should have been, admitted because of the things and the thoughts and the lies that I had bit into my own life. And, bringing this back to our brothers and sisters who are behind bars, is I would really
Mhm.
encourage you guys, while you're in prison or in jail, to look at this as a mercy of God, that
Mhm.
this is not your final destination. And even if you have a life sentence, this isn't your final destination. And you can use
Mhm.
this time wisely to
Mhm.
heal and seek help, because even though it's hard, it's worth it. Because on the other side of that hard work, on the other side of sowing seeds of peace, you will reap peace. You will reap
Yes.
joy. You will reap wisdom. And these things, like, again, let God do the heavy lifting. Let
Mhm.
God, shepherd you into the right job. Let God, bring you into freedom, or let you,
Mhm.
have a second chance at life
Mhm.
outside of the bar, outside of being behind bars. Let him do the heavy lifting, but focus on what you can do in the seasons of
Mhm.
healing, in the seasons of reflecting, right? So it's not about behavior, it's about heart change. Because
Yes.
when your heart is changed and you go from, Christ says this, like, I no longer call you a slave, because a slave doesn't know what his master is doing, but I call you a friend. That mind shift of being a slave, of just a worker of God, to daughter or sonship, it just
Mhm.
changes the way you view things and do things. And you have a history in foster care and know what it's like to feel fatherless, to feel motherless, to feel like you don't have a family. And look at how God's given you a family in your spouse. Look at how God's given
Mhm.
you a family with Victorious Living and the other initiatives that you're a part of. and
Mhm.
and he did it, right? It wasn't because you behaved better, but you did the work in the meantime, to be healed and to be whole, and to, God doesn't want us walking around like zombies just waiting for heaven. He came to give us abundant life here on earth as well. And
Okay,
life
yes.
does not have to suck I mean, it will, because we live in a broken world where there's cancer and tornadoes and murder and all of these horrible, horrible
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
But it's not just us
Mm.
biding our time to get to heaven. Like, he's bringing heaven to earth, and
Mhm.
he's offered us a position in that. And
Mhm.
that's a very, very beautiful thing, that we get to be co-heirs with Christ and partners with him in bringing heaven on earth. And so it's a
Mhm.
rewiring and a changing of our thought process. And Simone, before I let you go, I always love asking each guest, and I know there's so many attributes of God, but what is one of your favorite attributes of God, or what is an attribute of God that he has shown you recently?
Hmm. 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 Gosh, this may be cliche, but his love, like God is love, and that may sound cliche, but the Lord is showing me like how he loves, and through that he's showing me how to love others.
Oh, yeah.
And I could go deeper into that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I
By all means.
and,
Yeah.
and it's not the cliche, oh God is love. Yay. No, it's like love is patient, love is kind, love doesn't boast, love endures all things. Like there's so many components to that love, and God is all of those things. I can just
Yeah.
I'm so
I know.
excited.
It's,
So he's showing me that right
I love
now.
that.
His love.
His love, and it
Mhm.
knows no bounds, right? And
Mhm.
so much so that he conquered something we could have never conquered, which is death. And it's such a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. And if we get nothing else here on this side of heaven, so to speak, at least we have his son, and we have his righteousness, and we have his mercy, and we have his grace, and we have his love, and all of the things, his mercy, his judgments, his grace, all of
Mhm.
it stems from his love.
His love. Yes.
And it's so deep,
Mm.
it's so
That's good.
beautiful. It doesn't require anything from us. And so that is also one thing I'd love to admonish in people is, when you become saved and you get the Holy Spirit and he guides you and he speaks to you and he talks to you, as we grow and mature in our walks with God, we start to fine tune our, we start to hear his voice, right? A little
Mhm.
bit better. And we start to go, oh, wait, I think that's my thought. I think that's the Lord's thought. I think that's maybe from the enemy. And something I love to say is, the Lord's voice doesn't condemn, and it doesn't add a yoke on us. And so if
That's
there's anything in your life that you feel like and it's not like, when I say burden, it's not like, oh, my heart is burdened for this issue and I'm grieving this
Mhm.
issue. I mean, like, I must do this or else. That type of
Mhm.
mentality is not from the Lord. And, again, the Lord's voice
Yes.
is obviously convicting, but it's loving, it's kind, it's
Mhm.
joyful. He sings songs over us, wild to think about. And we serve a happy God, and he is delighted in you. And
Mhm.
that is a very wild thing to think about, because God is big, right? So oftentimes when we think something's big, then it must be mad, or, it must be frustrated. But
Mhm.
we know the wrath of God was satisfied on that cross. And when you accept him as your savior and you're willing to surrender your will for his, just trust me, his will is way more fun, way more exciting. It's so intimate to you and specific to you. So Simone's calling and my calling and the things that God's put in our heart isn't going to look the same as yours. And that's a great thing, because our God is creative and he is so loving and he is so kind and he wants a relationship with you. And so don't let the fear of condemnation,
Mhm.
stress of him being good or being God and being big, worry you about his heart, because his heart is gentle and lowly, and he would do anything to be with you. And so, Simone, thank you so
Good.
much for joining us today and sharing your story and encouraging me and encouraging those who are listening. I'm so excited to see what God's up to in your life. I know it's going to be an adventure of a lifetime, and he's a big dreamer. So I love that you've partnered in big dreams with him. So Simone, thank you so much for joining the Victorious Living podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Victorious Living Podcast. Did you know that you can help incarcerated men and women experience victorious living? Visit victoriouslivingmagazine.com to find out more information. Are you an inmate in prison who needs encouragement? Write to us at Victorious Living, P.O. Box 2751, Greenville, North Carolina 27836. Every inmate who writes to us from prison receives personal correspondence from our team, quarterly devotions, as well as their own quarterly subscription to Victorious Living Magazine.